is Excel for Beginners, the complete course. It doesn't matter how little experience you have in Excel. I promise you that as you watch this video and follow along, that you will learn everything you need to know to get started using Excel effectively. Don't be intimidated by Excel. You can do it. And regardless of what version of Excel you're using, this video is what you need to get started using Excel. In this first section, we're going to look at how to create workbooks in Excel and how to save them. And also we'll learn the basics of what I call the anatomy of a spreadsheet and also the layout in Microsoft Excel. Let's get started. So whenever you start up Excel, it should take you first to a screen similar to this one. You may see a list of recently used spreadsheets, but you'll also have a way to create a new blank workbook. And I'm going to click here just to show that there will often also be templates that you can click to open up and use. You can also search, and there's a button here to more templates. But I'm just going to click blank workbook to open up a brand new, completely blank workbook in Microsoft Excel. And before we create anything in this workbook, let's talk about the anatomy of a spreadsheet. When you're working in Microsoft Excel, you will always have at least one sheet. You can see here in the lower left it says sheet 1, but it's possible to have multiple sheets. And all of those sheets collectively together are called a workbook. Right now my workbook just has the one spreadsheet. In Excel, spreadsheets are made up of columns. You can see this is column E, this is column C, this is column K. And when I select the letter for that column, the entire column gets selected. We also have rows in Excel. This is row 3, this is row 9, this is row 10. So every column has a column letter and every row has a row number. Now the intersection of a column and a row is what we call a cell. So for example, this cell here is the intersection of column E and row 10. And an Excel workbook can contain over 17 billion cells. When you click on a cell, that becomes the active cell. Now, one of the most powerful things about the cells in Excel is that each one can be described by the intersection of its column and row. So for example, this is cell F8, and that's how you say it, F8. What cell is this? This is cell L4, and this is cell B7. Now, because of this fact that you can describe every single cell in Microsoft Excel, there's a lot of exciting possibilities that come about because of that. And you'll see that as you begin using Excel more. The next part of the anatomy of a spreadsheet is range. A range is a collection of cells that are generally grouped together. So I've clicked and dragged to select a group of cells in Excel. This is a range. And we can also describe every range in Microsoft Excel, once again using the column letters and the row numbers. The way you do this is you start in the upper left corner of the range and you describe that cell. So D4 through, and then you go to the lower right corner and describe that cell, J14. So the description of this range, its reference basically, is D4 through J14. And in Excel, the way you indicate through is with a colon. So D4 through J14. This is very important and will become more and more useful and important as you keep using Excel. So that is the anatomy of a spreadsheet. We have columns, we have rows, we have cells. The cell that you've selected is the active cell, and we have ranges. And all of this is done on a sheet or spreadsheet, or it's also called worksheet. You can add more worksheets by clicking this plus sign. Now I have 2 sheets, now I have 3 sheets, and the collection of all of these sheets together is what we call a workbook. Now, in addition to the anatomy of the spreadsheet, it's also important to understand the layout that we have to work with in Microsoft Excel. As you use Excel, you'll notice that there are tabs across the top of the screen. Generally, you'll start on the Home tab, but we also have the Insert tab, Page Layout tab, Data tab, etc. Whenever you click a tab, the tool buttons that you have here below change, and this part of the layout is called the ribbon. So if I click the Formulas tab, I get the Formulas ribbon. If I click the View tab, the ribbon completely changes. Now I have the View ribbon. And each ribbon is divided up into groups. You can see the groups are separated by lines. So I have a Charts group, I have a Tours group, a Comments group, a Tables group, etc. Now, not all of the options can fit in such a small group. For example, my charts group is not big enough to hold all of the options. So some of the groups have what I call a launch button, or sometimes it's called a dialog launcher, but I'll just call it a launch button. Not all of the groups have these launch buttons, but if you click on a launch button, it'll open up with even more options than could normally fit in the space provided on the ribbon. In addition to the tabs, the ribbons, and the groups, and the launch buttons, we also have some other layout features that you really need to know. Over here on the right, we have a scroll bar that you can use to move down your spreadsheet and up the spreadsheet. We also have a horizontal scroll bar. Underneath that, we have a zoom slider. If I slide this to the right, I zoom in on the spreadsheet. If I slide it to the left, I zoom out on the spreadsheet. Doing this does not change the data at all. It just zooms in or out. I have some view buttons here in the lower right corner. I can go to page break preview or the page layout view, but most Excel users spend most of their time in normal view. Here in the upper left, we have what's called the name box. Whenever you click on a cell, you can look in the name box to see the description of that cell or the name for that cell. And later you'll learn that this name box can do even more for you. Here at the top of my Excel layout, I have the quick access toolbar, and I have customized this. Yours may look different, but this gives me quick access to some of the most commonly used features in Microsoft Excel: my save button, an undo button, auto sum, and more. Here's my title for this spreadsheet. Over here I have my close button. It looks like an X. If I click that, the spreadsheet will close. And then finally here I have a very special bar called the formula bar. In many cases, this is where you'll go to enter formulas into Microsoft Excel. So now that you know about the anatomy of a spreadsheet and also the layout in Microsoft Excel, you are completely ready to begin learning to use Excel. At this point, I'm going to click File and Save. But because this is my first time saving this document, it's having me do a Save As. I need to decide where to save this Excel workbook. So I'm going to click on Browse, and I'm just going to save it in My Documents. And I'll just write a name for it: Excel for Beginners, Complete Course, and Save. It's time now for the second segment of this course, which is how to enter cell values in Microsoft Excel. And let's say I work for a small business and I've been asked to create a payroll spreadsheet for the employees. Here in column A, I'd like to have the employee ID numbers. In column B, the employee names, and then some information about their wages, the hours worked, how much they are owed, etc. And anytime in Excel, when you want to enter data into a cell, it's important to first select that cell. There's a saying that I heard once that I use over and over, which is select to affect. If I want to affect this spreadsheet, if I want to affect the data in the spreadsheet, first I have to select something. So I want to affect A1, so I'll select it. Just by clicking on it once, I can now affect it by typing. So let's say the employee ID number for employee 1 is simply 1. I type the number 1 and that data appears in the cell, but it's not truly entered in the cell until I tap Enter or Return on the keyboard. Now the data is inside that cell. Notice when I tapped Enter, the active cell moved down 1, and that's great because that's where I want to type the next number: 2, Enter, 3, Enter, 4, Enter, and I could just continue to do this down the spreadsheet. But that is kind of a repetitive task, and Excel has a built-in feature to make it so it's not so repetitive. There's something called the fill handle or the autofill handle in Microsoft Excel. And the way it works is that it's been set up to identify patterns and then to extend those patterns. So I want to show Excel the pattern that is developing here. The pattern is adding 1 to the previous number. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The pattern is clear. I'm just adding 1. So if I click and drag to select that range, A1 through A4, the pattern should be clear. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this a little better. But if you look in the lower right corner of this range that I've selected, you'll see a little green square. That's what we call the autofill handle or the fill handle. If I put my mouse pointer directly on that little green square, notice that the mouse pointer becomes a black plus sign. Now if I click and hold the click, I can drag down the spreadsheet. I'm going to go all the way to 70. And then I can release the mouse button and look what it does. Excel automatically extended the pattern that I showed it. Next, I'm going to click on cell B1 because I want to affect that cell. And I'll type the name of the first employee. And then I'll tap Enter. And again, the active cell moves down the spreadsheet. I can type the next employee name, and I'm just going to use first names so that this goes faster, and the third name. Now you'll notice I misspelled one of the names. This is supposed to be James, not Jams. So this gives me the opportunity to teach you a very important concept in Microsoft Excel, and that is the difference between clicking on a cell and clicking in a cell. When you click on a cell once, the whole cell is selected. So if I click on Jams and I try to fix this so that it says James, the first letter I type will erase whatever the contents of that cell already is. So that's what happens when you click on a cell and type. It erases everything that's already there. Well, what if I've got 5 or 6 words in this cell and only one word is misspelled? I don't want to have to retype all of it. So instead of clicking on the cell, I'm going to double click on the cell, and that gets me inside the cell. Now you can see my flashing cursor, and I can use the arrow keys to move that cursor to exactly the right place, and then I can type and fix the misspelled word. Then I can tap enter on the keyboard, and that correction is entered into the cell. Now as you're entering data into Excel, every time you tap enter, the active cell should move down. But what if you need to move up? You can hold the shift key and tap enter, and that should move you up the spreadsheet. Give me a few seconds to finish entering names, and then I'll resume. Now that I've finished my list of names, I'm going to click here on cell B1 because I need to show you, in addition to moving down the spreadsheet by tapping enter and up the spreadsheet by using shift enter, you can move right and left by using the tab key. So if I tap tab, I move to the right. Now I'm on cell C1 and I can type in the hourly wage of Julia. If I need to move to the left, you can probably guess what keys I need to press. Shift tab moves me to the left. So enter is down, shift enter is up, tab is to the right, shift tab is to the left. So I'm going to tab over to cell D1 and I'll put in the number of hours Julia has worked in this month, 160. I'll tab over. The next thing we need to learn about entering cell values in Excel is how to clear and copy cell contents. So we've already looked at how to edit them by double clicking, but what if you just need to copy the contents of one cell to another cell? You can click on a cell or even a range if you prefer, and then hold the control key and tap C to copy. Now there are other ways to do this. You could go to the Home tab and you could click this button here to copy the contents of cell C1 in this case. It's also possible to right click, copy, but in most cases, simply using Control C to copy and Control V to paste is going to be your fastest way to copy paste. So I could just keep pasting in the number 15 in each of these cells, but remember we have a tool called the autofill handle, and it's great to avoid the repetitive entering of data. So now with just cell C5 selected, what is the pattern that the autofill handle is going to see? The only pattern I'm showing it is one number. If I click on the autofill handle and pull down the spreadsheet all the way down to the bottom, it's going to extend that pattern of just the number 15, and it basically copies that same number all the way down the page. So that's a shortcut that we can use. But what if this number isn't accurate for all of these employees? Maybe Amelia is making more than $15 an hour. I could click on that cell and just overwrite it with another number, tap enter, and that's a very fast way to do it. But there are times when you need to not only delete the information that's there by either overwriting it or tapping the delete key or backspace key on the keyboard, but sometimes you need to completely clear everything that's in that cell, not just the data, but maybe also the formatting and other information. You can do that a couple of different ways. One is to right-click on the cell and choose Clear Contents, but one of my favorite ways is to select the cell or range of cells, and then go up here to the Home tab. On the Home ribbon in the Editing group, we have this button. And if you click the arrow next to the button, you can clear all, or just clear the formats, contents, hyperlinks, etc. I'll click Clear All, and everything is completely wiped clean out of that range. I'll hold Control and tap Z to undo that, but it's important that you know about that feature. Now, as I'm building this spreadsheet, I'm realizing it's going to be hard for me to remember exactly what each of these columns of data represents. 15 what, 16 what, 160 what. I should have put in column titles or headings. So let's look at how to insert new rows and columns into Excel. If I need another blank row above row number 1, what can I do? Well, all I have to do is right-click on the number 1 and choose Insert. If I need a new blank column, all I need to do is right-click on, let's say, column A and choose Insert, and I get a column to the left of column A. I can also insert columns in between data, so I'll right-click on D insert, now I get a blank column between C and now E, and I could do the same with rows. I'm going to undo all of that to get back to this point where I just have a new blank row above my data. And I'll click here on cell A1 and I'll call this employee ID. I'll use tab to move over to cell B1 and I'll type name. I'll use tab to go over to C1 and I'll type hourly wage, and I'll tap tab to move over to D1 and I'll type hours worked. I'll tab over to E1 and type taxable income. At this point, I'll tap enter on the keyboard. Now I understand a lot better what all of the data in these columns is about. Now you probably noticed that not all of my data in row number 1 actually fits inside the columns. For example, in C1, hourly wage doesn't really fit in the space I have provided for it. So let's look at how to fix that. I could click and hold the click between the letter C and the letter D, column C and D. And then I could drag that column to make it so the text fits. And I could do the same with column A, column D, column E. But let me show you a faster way. If I click and drag across from A all the way to E, actually clicking on the column letters, and then if I double click between any two of these column letters, let's say between B and C, I'll double click. What happens is all of the columns are resized to the perfect width so that the data that's inside those columns will fit. That looks a lot better. Now, as I'm entering data in Excel, from time to time, I may need a little help with that. For example, let's say that the standard hourly wage increases from $15 an hour to $15.50 an hour. How could I quickly update all of this information? One way to do that would be to use Find and Replace. So here in Excel, if I go to the Home tab on the Home ribbon, in the Editing group, you'll find Find and Select. You may see the text or you may just have a magnifying glass. If you click on the arrow next to that, notice that there's an option for Find and there's also Replace. I'm going to select Replace, and this lets me find what, let's say 15, and replace it with 15.5. And I'll select Replace All. All done, we made 70 replacements. I click OK and close. You'll notice that all of the 15s have been turned into 15.5. Now there is one problem with that. Notice employee ID number 15, and so I can just update that manually. So that is a great time saver. If you want to keep your hands on the keyboard more, instead of using the mouse to go over here and click on Find and Replace, you could hold Control on the keyboard and tap H, and that brings up the Find and Replace option. Generally speaking, anytime you can keep your hands on the keyboard and not use the mouse, you'll be able to work more efficiently in Excel. One other trick for entering cell values and data into Microsoft Excel that you'll definitely want to know is how to use the autocorrect features. So if I go here to File and choose More, I can go to Options, and here in my Excel options, I could go down here to Proofing, and here you'll see autocorrect options. Change how Excel corrects and formats text as you type. If I click this button, it lets me adjust some of these settings. So for example, right now, if I type a day, it will automatically capitalize the first letter of that day. And there's some other settings here that you can change. But down here, you'll notice that there's a replace blank with blank. And there's already some examples here of common misspelled words and how they'll be automatically corrected. So let's say I need to type the name and type T4TAS, tap enter. It's automatically auto-corrected to be the full name of my YouTube channel. I'm going to undo that. But definitely think about the autocorrect features in Microsoft Excel and adjust them to your advantage. I've now updated some of these hourly wages and I've put in all of the hours worked for each employee. One last thing I want to show you about entering values and managing the data that you put into Excel is I want to show you how to move the contents of cells. We've already looked at how to copy paste by clicking on a cell or range, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. You could also do a cut paste, Control X to cut, Control V to paste, and that essentially moves the data from one cell to another. But another way to do the same thing is just to click on a cell and then put your mouse on the very edge of that cell, any of the edges. You'll see that the mouse pointer becomes a cross with arrows coming out the ends. At that point, you can click and hold the click and then drag the contents of that cell anywhere you want it to go and then release the mouse button. I'm going to undo that with Control Z. I just want you to see that you can do the same thing with a range. Now that I've selected the range, I go to the very edge of that range, click and hold the click, and then drag the data where I want it to be, release the mouse button, and the data has been moved. Again, Control Z to put it back. With that, we're now ready for the third segment of Excel for Beginners complete course. In this segment, we're going to focus on formulas. I would like to calculate the total taxable income for each employee. And for that, I need to multiply each employee's wage by how many hours they worked. So I could do that in my head, or I could use a calculator and then just put in the information here. But that is exactly one of the things that Excel does best. Excel is a spreadsheet tool, yes, but it's also a calculator. It has built in pretty much all of the calculator functions and operators that you would need. So here on cell E2, I'm going to create my first formula. In Excel, whenever you're creating a formula, you need to start by typing equals. When I first started using Excel, this was confusing to me until I thought about algebra. In my Algebra 1 class that I took, I remember learning about variables. And there would be formulas like x equals, and then it would be y plus 10 divided by 3 or whatever. That's basically what we're doing here. So whenever I type equals, before I type it, I think E2, and then I type equals. So cell E2 equals whatever comes next. And here I could just type in 13.9, and then I could put in multiplied by, or times. And in Excel, we use an asterisk for multiply. So 13.9 multiplied by 158. And then I can type enter on the keyboard, and that is the taxable income for Julia. So that's one way to do a formula in Excel. You can type in the numbers, you can use plus signs, minus signs, asterisks for multiply, / for divide, and then just tap enter, and that formula will be executed. But there's another way to do the same thing, and it's a better way. Again, I need to start by clicking on the cell and then typing equals. But this time, instead of typing in the numbers, I'm going to type in the cell references. If you remember, in Excel, we can describe every cell in this spreadsheet. We can name it, basically. And remember, we do have this name box in the upper left corner to help us with that. So equals, and I'm going to name or describe this cell. So that would be C2. So I'll just type in C2 asterisk for multiplied by D2. And I'll type in D2. Now you'll notice, as I typed in those cell references, Excel highlighted them in different colors, so I can see exactly what I'm about to do. Now I'll tap enter on the keyboard, and I get the same result, but this time it's a little better. The reason why it's better is because this formula now is dynamic. If I change the contents of one of these cells, let's say it's a mistake, Julia doesn't really have a wage of 13.9, it's more like 14.25. I can tap enter and look at the taxable income, it's going to change. So this is a superior way to create a formula in Excel. There is one other method that I want you to be aware of. I could type equals, and then instead of typing the cell references, C3 asterisk D3, I could just click on the cell. So C3 asterisk, and then click on D3. Tap enter, and my formula produces results. Now it looks like the contents of cell E2 and cell E3 are simple numbers. It looks like the contents of E2 is 2,251.5 and the contents of E3, 2,480. But that's not actually true. If I double click on E2, you can see that the contents of that cell is just a formula. What about E3? Double click, the contents of that cell is a formula. So we see the results of the formula, but what actually is in the cell is a formula. And let's talk about the type of formula that we have. In both cases, these are relative cell references. What that means is, when I say C3 multiplied by D3, what Excel is interpreting that as being is just to multiply whatever is in two cells to the left, multiply that by whatever is in one cell to the left. So watch what happens now when I use the autofill handle. If you remember, the autofill handle lets me extend a pattern. If there is no pattern, what it does is it copies the contents of a cell. So I'm going to use the autofill handle, and I could click and drag all the way down the spreadsheet like I have in the past, but I want you to see a shortcut. If you have a table basically of data that's all together, instead of clicking and dragging on the autofill handle, it is faster just to double click on the autofill handle and it automatically extends down the page. So look at that. Because I used the autofill handle, I don't have to keep creating formula after formula after formula. My formula was copied and extended down the spreadsheet because I used the autofill handle. Now, how come that worked? The reason it worked is because of what I said a minute ago. Excel is interpreting these cell references as being relative, not absolute. So C3 Excel just interprets that as 2 cells to the left, D3, 1 cell to the left. Multiply the two together, you get a result. So down here, when I copied that formula down using the autofill handle, it just adjusted those cell references. It's still 2 cells to the left multiplied by 1 cell to the left. It's no longer bothering with C3 and D3. It's moved on to C4 times D4. What about down here? Double click, C7 multiplied by D7. The reason this works is because these are relative cell references. Now, what if I wanted to calculate the amount of taxes to be paid? Now, I understand this isn't how it's normally done, but let's pretend. And let's say the tax rate is 7%. And I'm going to enter this as a decimal, 0.07, and I tap enter. Let's use a formula now to calculate the taxes to be paid. I'll click here on cell F2, and in my head, I'll say to myself, cell F2, and then I type equals the taxable income of Julia in this case, multiplied by the tax rate, H1. I'll tap enter on the keyboard, and you can see the results. This worked beautifully. But what happens when I use the autofill handle and double click to extend that down the page? It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let's look at these formulas. Because I used relative cell references here in my original formula, Excel is looking 1 cell to the left and multiplying it by 2 cells to the right and 1 above. So when I copied that formula down the spreadsheet, it continued that pattern. It's looking 1 cell to the left, 2 cells to the right, and 1 up. And because these cells are empty, it's like multiplying by 0. So I'm going to fix this formula by clicking on cell F2. And in Excel, anytime I want to extend a formula, work on a formula, what I like to do is click on a cell, and then instead of editing it here by double clicking on it and making some changes, it's easier and better in most cases to just select the cell and then go up here to what's called the formula bar. This is a safer, easier, better place to edit and work with your Excel formulas. So right now, these are relative cell references. I want to change the H1 reference to become an absolute cell reference. The way I do that is by putting a $sign in front of the H and a $sign in front of the 1, and then tap enter on the keyboard. And what those $signs do is they force Excel, whenever this formula is copied or used, to always refer exactly to column H and to row 1. So that part of the formula, no matter how far down the spreadsheet I copy it, it will remain fixed on cell H1. Let's try it now. I'll double click on the autofill handle. It copies down the page. Let's see if it's working. It looks like it is. If I double click on any of these formulas, you can see they're all referring back to cell H1, and that's where the tax rate is kept. So that's a very important concept to understand, the difference between relative cell references like this one and absolute cell references like this one. And cell references could be partially relative and partially absolute. I could have left the $sign off the H and just kept the $sign on the 1. There are 2 more things you need to know about using formulas before we move on. The first is that from time to time, you may make a mistake in your formulas. For example, if I tried dividing the contents of cell E2 by 0, that's not possible. It's an error. I tap enter on the keyboard and I'll get an error message. Error messages look something like this, often with hashtags or other symbols. Sometimes you'll be warned that what you're entering may be an error. For example, if I do it this way, I get a warning. Do I want to accept their correction? Yes or no? And so if you see things like this, that's okay. This is Excel trying to warn me that I've created something that is producing an error. And in most cases, I'll go to the formula bar to fix that error. And finally, it's important to know that you can change the name of a cell and also the name of a range. So for example, I could click here on F2 and drag all the way down the spreadsheet. And then I could go here to the name box and I could click and I could change the name that's in that box to be something like taxes owed. And I'm not going to put in any spaces there. I'll tap enter on the keyboard. And now that range has its own special name. If I forget what I named that range, I can always click here on this drop-down arrow and it tells me taxes owed. Now, why would that be important? You'll learn that later, but let me give you a quick preview. In my formula, instead of referring just to a cell like E3, I could refer to a named cell or a named range. So I could type in taxes owed and then continue my formula. So taxes owed plus 1. tap enter, and it's added 1 to each of those cells. Now that's not a great example. Like I said, you'll learn later on in this video and in other videos I've created, how you can use those named ranges in some exciting ways. In this next segment of Excel for Beginners, the complete course, we're going to focus on functions. And many users of Excel constantly confuse formulas and functions. You'll even find those mistakes in other videos on YouTube. But there's a definite difference between the term function and formula in Excel. And the first function that I want to teach you is sum. Let's say I want to add up all of the hours worked and all of the taxable income to be paid to the employees. I could just browse down the sheet here to the bottom of the data. Column D has the hours worked, and I'll click here in D72 and type equals. Again, thinking in my head, D72 equals, and then I'll use my first function, sum. Now, as soon as I start typing a word in that cell, Microsoft Excel searches its database of functions and tries to find the function that I might be looking for. And there it is, it's sum. So Excel is suggesting to me that that might be the one to use. It tells me what it does. It adds all of the numbers in a range of cells. Perfect, that's exactly what I want. But it's possible that I might want this, sum if, or sum ifs, sum product. There's all of these different functions that deal with sums. And some of these are amazing. You definitely need to watch my other tutorials on sum if and sum ifs. Sum product is also great. But in this case, all I want to do is add up all the numbers in a range of cells. So equals sum. And when you use a function in Excel, after typing the function, you put in a left parenthesis. As soon as I do that, Excel gives me a pop-up with some suggestions. It's trying to help me and guide me in writing a good formula using this sum function. So Excel is expecting to have a number and then a comma and another number. So I could put in a number and then another number to be added together. Let's say 5, 6, and then I should put in my right parenthesis, although it's not necessary. And then I could tap enter and it adds those two together. But in this case, I don't want to add 5 and 6. I want to add this entire column. So how do I describe this entire range of numbers that I want to add up? Well, if you remember, we can describe a range by using the top left corner and then the colon and then the lower right corner. In this case, it's all just in one column. So D2, and then I'll go back down here. So D2 and then the colon, so through. I want to sum D2 through D71. I should put in a right parenthesis, but I don't have to. I'll tap enter on the keyboard. There's the grand total hours worked by the employees. Let's look at another way to do the same thing. Instead of typing the cell references, I could just say this cell and type equals sum left parenthesis, and then I could have clicked and dragged to select the entire range, all of the numbers that I want to add up, and then back down in my formula, I could have tapped enter and gotten the same results. Now, because the sum function is so common in Microsoft Excel, they've added what's called the AutoSum function. So instead of even typing that formula at all, I can just select the cell beneath the data that I want to sum up. And then I simply go here to the Home tab, Home ribbon. In the editing group, this symbol stands for AutoSum. So I'll click that, and Excel automatically figured out what I want to add up, D2 through D71. Tap enter, and it's done. So in many cases, AutoSum is the fastest, best way to do that. At this point, I probably should type something here like totals, colon, and maybe I could click on it and go to the Home tab, font group, and make it bold. Maybe I go to the alignment group and change it to be aligned right. And now I could do the same formula, AutoSum, for taxable income. Or instead of redoing the formula, I'll just click on D72 and I'll use the autofill handle to scoot that over and the formula adjusted. Because these are relative cell references, they don't have dollar signs. When I autofilled it over to the right, those cell references adjusted and it worked beautifully. In addition to the sum function, there are some other functions that are pretty common and important. For example, we can calculate the average. Let's do that. With cell D73 selected, I'll type equals, this cell equals, average, and you can see that I do get similar helps as I did with sum. Excel explains what this is. It also can tell me about these other average functions, but I'll stick with the generic average. Now that I've put in a function, I need to put the left parenthesis, and I'll put in my range, D2 through D71. Tap enter on the keyboard. There is the average number of hours worked by this group of employees in the last month. I can autofill that to the right, and there we have the average taxable income. Now, if you remember, we set up a named range for the data here in taxes to be paid. Let's look at how named ranges work with formulas and functions. So here on F72, I'm going to say to myself, F72 equals the sum of, and I'll put in a left parenthesis. It's looking for a number. I'm just going to type in taxes owed, and then I'll put in my right parenthesis. And notice Excel recognizes taxes owed. Oh, you want to add up all of the taxes owed. And Excel knows what that means because I named that range. So now when I tap enter, it just automatically sums up everything in the taxes owed range. I can do the same thing with average. So F72 equals average, left parenthesis, taxes owed. Tap enter, and it figures it out. Let's look at 3 other important and common functions in Microsoft Excel. We're going to calculate the highest hours worked, the lowest, and then also we're going to count the number of employees. So here I'll type highest, lowest, and number of employees. Okay, how am I going to figure this out? If I want to know what the highest amount of hours worked was out of all of these employees, and I also want to know the highest taxable income of all of these employees, there's got to be a good way to do that in Excel that's easier than just scanning and looking for the highest number. Fortunately, there is. There's a function called max. So in my head, I'll think D74 equals max, left parenthesis, and then I just need to describe the range of cells to look in. I want to find the highest number, the max number in this range, D2 through D71. I should put in my right parenthesis, but I don't have to. Tap enter, and the highest number of hours worked in this month by this group of employees is 208. I can autofill that over to the right, and I'll just go to both columns now to the right. And now we know the highest taxable income amount and the highest amount of taxes due. Let's do the same with lowest. I think to myself, cell D75 equals, instead of max, I'm going to put min. And you can see Excel's giving me hints, giving me suggestions. Min returns the smallest number in a set of values. It ignores logical values and text. So equals min, left parenthesis, D2 through D71. Tap enter, and there's the lowest amount of hours worked. I use the autofill handle to extend it over to these other columns of data. Our last common function that I'm going to show at this point in the video is count. I want to count the total number of employees. Now you might be saying, don't we already have that? Yes, we do. It's right here. But in some cases, you don't have that, or you want to count different parts of a spreadsheet. So it's important to know this. In my head, I think D76 is equal to count. And there are different types of counts. Count A, count if, count ifs. Definitely watch my other videos on those different functions. But for now, just count. And you can see what it does. It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. So left parenthesis, once again, D2 through D71, right parenthesis, tap enter, and it counts up 70 different cells in that range that have numbers. If I wanted to, I could autofill this over, but it's just going to give me 70 again. So those are the 5 or 6 most commonly used functions in Microsoft Excel. If you want to learn more functions in Excel, check out my other videos. I have lots and lots of different functions that I show in those other tutorials, and there's more to come in the future. In this next segment, we're going to focus on how to modify the formatting in the spreadsheet, including how to format numbers and text. We'll also look at formatting cells, rows, and columns, and a couple of tricks that will help you do your formatting more effectively. We're going to format some of these numbers. Notice that it's hard to tell the difference between money, dollars in this case, taxable income, and just regular hours worked. They all just look like numbers. So let's change the formatting so it's obvious what we're dealing with. To do this, I'm going to click on column C. It's going to select the entire column. And then here on the Home tab, Home ribbon, in the number group, I can change the formatting. Right now it's just general formatting. That's the default. But if I click on this arrow, I can change this to be currency. Now you can clearly tell the difference between the data in column C and the data in column D. Now there are times when instead of using currency as the number format, you might want to use accounting. Let's look at the difference. When I click on accounting, I still get the dollar sign, I still get commas and decimals for the cents, but the dollar sign is separated from the numbers. I think it just makes it a little easier to see the numbers without getting confused by the $sign. So those are two different ways to indicate that we're dealing with money in these columns. Same with this one here. I'll switch that also to accounting. Now there are other number formats that you should look into, including dates and times, percentages, fractions, and more. Watch my other tutorials to learn more about the different number formats. What about text formats? I could just leave my text as general format, or I could go down here and select text. And in Excel, by default, when you have text entered in a cell, it will align to the left of the cell. So all of this text is aligned to the left. If Excel interprets what you type as numbers, generally speaking, it will align to the right in the cell. So you can see all of these numbers are aligned to the right. These names are aligned to the left. But you can change some of that if you want using the alignment options and also by changing the number or text formats. There are also some more formats. You can click here to see what those are. You can set up some custom formats. There's different time and date formats that are worth checking out. I'm going to cancel, and let's look at some other ways that we can format our data, and especially let's look at how to format columns and rows in Excel. Let's say I want to format this entire first row so that everything in that row is bolded. I think that's a good idea in this case because I'd really like to set apart that row so that people can tell it's not really part of the actual data. These are column titles or labels. So having selected row 1, I'm going to click on the Home tab, Home ribbon. In the font group, I'll just click on this bold symbol. Now that entire row is bolded. And if I were to go to, let's say, cell I1, and if I type something there, you can see that it comes in bold, formatted just like the rest of this row. Other ways that I could format rows include changing the alignment of the cells in a row. So here on the Home tab, Home ribbon, in the Alignment group, I can click this button to center each cell in row 1 within its column. If I wanted to, I could change the background color for the row. And there are many other format options for rows and columns in Excel. If you'd like to learn more about those, please watch my mini tutorials that cover formatting in Excel. Next, I want to show you a shortcut you can use when you're trying to format columns, rows, cells, etc. in Microsoft Excel. Let's say you get a cell formatted just the way you want, and then later you decide you would like to also format other cells in exactly the same way. One trick that you can try is select the cell that has the formatting you want, and then go to the Home tab, Home ribbon. In the Clipboard group, you can click this Format Painter. With that clicked, whatever you click on next will take on the same exact formatting as the active cell. So I'm going to click here on James. James is now centered and bolded. Now if I click on Freddie, it doesn't work because the Format Painter now is deselected. If you want to be able to click multiple times and apply the same formatting, all you have to do is, again, select the cell that has the formatting you want, and then double click on the Format Painter. And now you can click, 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 just continue to click and add the new formatting to the cells. You can also apply the formatting to a whole range. I'm going to undo all of that with Control-Z. One other formatting trick that you might want to know is you can use what's called auto format. But first, you need to add it here to the Quick Access toolbar. To do this, just click up here on the Customize Quick Access toolbar button and go down to More Commands. And then here you can switch from Popular Commands to All Commands, and then just browse down until you find Auto Format. There it is. So with it selected, I can click Add, and now it will be added to the Quick Access toolbar. I click OK, and here it is. To use the Auto Format tool, all I need to do is click somewhere in my data, and then go up here and click Auto Format. I can browse through the options for the different formats. If I find one that I like, I can just click on it, click OK, and that format is added to this spreadsheet. I'm going to undo that. So those are some of the most important and most common formatting options that we have in Microsoft Excel. In this next segment of Excel for Beginners, the complete course, we're going to look at how to create some basic charts. In Excel, there are a few different ways to create charts. Let's look at one of the very easiest. And to do this, the first thing I want to do is make sure I can see the important data. So I'm going to go down here to the zoom slider and I'll click and slide that to the left. And then I'm going to click and drag to highlight the data that's important to me. In this case, I don't really need the tax rate. I also don't need the totals and the average, etc. here below. Just all of that data there. Hold the Alt key and tap F1. And look what Excel did. It did its very best to create a chart that makes some sense. Because I selected all of the data, Excel is trying to figure out a way to show all of it in one chart, and it's kind of hard to do this. But you can see across the bottom here, I have a list of names, employee IDs, and then the bars show hourly wage, hours worked, taxable income, taxes to be paid. And this is all color coordinated. If I want to, I can click on the chart and then go up here to Chart Design, and I could change the chart type. So instead of this stacked column chart type, I could switch to a clustered column, click OK, let's see how that looks. And if I don't like that, I can go back to Chart Design, change chart type, and we could try a pie chart or some other chart. Because I selected all of the data, this is going to be very difficult to chart all of it all at once. I really should chart only a very specific amount of data. But I wanted you to see how to quickly add a chart based on the data in your sheet. Once you have your chart, you can go up here to Chart Design and you can add some chart elements. For example, I could add a chart title. I could put it above the chart if I want to, and then I could just triple click on the text there to select it, and I'll just title this Summary Chart. I could also add other chart elements like axis titles, a horizontal axis title, and I could also add a primary vertical axis title. Like I said, this chart is too much. It's too much information in one place, but in many cases, you'll be creating a simple spreadsheet, and holding Alt and tapping F1 will produce a chart that's very useful to you. If you'd like to learn more about charts in Microsoft Excel, please watch my many other videos that focus specifically on creating charts in Excel. In this next and final segment of Microsoft for Beginners, the complete course, I will show you the print options and the publishing options that you have in Microsoft Excel. So let's say with the data that's in this spreadsheet and with this very confusing chart that I've made, let's say this spreadsheet is ready to be printed, to be handed out and published for its intended audience. And the first question that I need to ask myself is, will the data in this spreadsheet actually fit on a printed page? It may not. To help with that, you can go to the File tab and go down to Print, and that will give you a print preview here at the right. And it looks like my data fits pretty well on this page. If I scroll down, I can see that page 2 is just more rows of data. Page 3 is part of my summary chart. So that actually worked out pretty well. But if you remember, I had entered the word hello here in the upper right. I'm going to go back into Excel, add that back in, and now I'll go to File, Print, and now take a look at the results. I have page 1, but if I go down, there's page 2, and then there's page 3 with hello sitting there and with my chart. So if I want to make sure that this column also is included with the rest of the data, there's some changes I need to make. I need to prepare this spreadsheet to be printed. One way I could fix this is to go to the Page Layout tab, and in the Page Setup group, I could click on Orientation and switch the orientation of the spreadsheet from Portrait to Landscape. In many cases, that will solve your printing problems in Microsoft Excel. So now when I go to File, Print, look, all of my data fits horizontally on one sheet, except for my chart. If I go down to page 2, that's what it looks like. We've got page 3, and page 4 is part of a chart. So I still have the problem of the chart, but at least the data here is fitting horizontally on a page without having to go to another horizontal page to the right. Another thing you can try when working with printing options in Microsoft Excel is you can go to the View tab and switch from Normal Workbook View to Page Break Preview. When you click that, it will show you where your pages are. So this is page 1, page 2, page 3, and it gives you these blue dashed lines that you can click on and drag. So I want to try to move the page break to be here to the far right side beyond my crazy chart. Let's switch back now to the normal view, and I'll do File, Print, and let's take a look. I used to have 3 pages or 4 pages worth of data to print. Now look, I only have 2 pages. This is page 1, and the chart fits very nicely with the data. When I click this button to go to page 2, there's page 2. So this is the best print preview that I've seen so far. At this point, I just need to decide how many copies I want to print. Let's say 2. I need to make sure I've selected the correct printer. I don't actually have a printer set up, so it's going to print to PDF, but generally you would click here and select your actual printer from the list. There are some settings to think about. I could print only the active sheets, so sheets that I've been working on that are active, or you could print the entire workbook. The other option is to print a selection. So if I go back to the spreadsheet, I could click and drag, I could leave out employee ID maybe, and just get this selection and then go to File, Print, and switch from Print Active Sheets to Print Selection, and that's what it will look like now. I think I'll go back to Print Active Sheets. If you want, you can choose to print only page 1, or if I had a longer spreadsheet, I could print pages 5 through 7, whatever you want to do there. You can adjust the orientation if you want, the page size, etc. There is a very interesting option here at the bottom, custom scaling. If you want, you can click on this and you could choose Fit Sheet on 1 page. It will shrink the printout so it fits on 1 page. So I click that, and now the entire spreadsheet fits only on 1 page. So that is an option. Just keep in mind, if you have a lot of data, it's going to be tiny. It'll be hard to read. Okay, at this point, I'm going to click Print. Now remember, I have no printer, so it's going to be printing to a PDF. And this is a good option, whether you have a printer or not. If you want to turn what you see here into a PDF that you could email to people, you could publish it to the web, you could include it as an attachment in an email to someone, this is a really good option. So I'll click Print, and it asks me, where do I want to save this PDF? I'll save it to my Downloads folder, and I'll give it a file name and click Save. Now if I look in my Downloads folder, here it is. I can open it up, and I have this beautiful PDF that's tough to read. So those are the basics of printing documents in Microsoft Excel. And you can use the Save as PDF to publish your document to the web if you'd like. Other ways you can publish your document include clicking this Share button in the upper right. I might want to upload my document to OneDrive. Once I've done that, a copy of the document will be online and I can easily share it and send it and publish it. If you want to learn about OneDrive, the ability to attach this workbook as an Excel workbook or as a PDF. So those are some good share options. And then also here on the File tab, if I choose Save As, that's another way to save to OneDrive. But also, look what I can do. Here where it says Excel Workbook, I can click this arrow to change the kind of file that this is. I've been working in Excel, and this is an Excel workbook, but I could save it as another type of Excel workbook. For example, a macro-enabled workbook. You'll learn more about that as you watch more of my videos. You could also save your workbook as an HTML web page, which is an interesting option. You could save it as an Excel template. You could save it as a CSV file, which is a powerful option. And once again, we do have an option to save it as a PDF. So it's important to be aware of this dropdown and the ability that you have to save your finished workbook in other formats. So congratulations, at this point you have completed the Excel for Beginners complete course. At this point you have everything that you need to know to use Excel effectively. Yes, there's more that you could learn, but you have all of the basics that you need to be successful. If you and just go to sheet number 2 and then follow along with my video, watching it again and doing each step one at a time, and then you could compare it to what I did on sheet 1. If you're ready